Um, we had the privilege of having you speak to our board of directors at the Hebrew University. We had for the Florence Melton School. And at that time, right, just generally spoke about hope, the way that you speak about hope in general. And it was very well received at the time. So uh, what we're doing now, one of the projects that we have on an ongoing basis is that once a month, we send out something. It's a newsletter we call the Thread, and the Thread goes out to 8,000, 15,000 people on our mailing list that have learned with Melton over the years. And it has usually just like snippets from an interview on some topic that's somehow relevant, at the time. It comes from me, this newsletter, and then it'll have like two, three snippets from this 30-minute interview that our people will our PR people will choose. Um, they also make a they also make kind of like usually a written kind of newsletter article. This is all during 1 month, so it'll be during
Okay.
it'll get processed probably in January. It'll be in January. So that's it. So, it's an opportunity for us to just give a little publicity to the people that we interview, and also for us to share with them some teaching that's inspiring to them. So that's the nature of it. Okay. So like I said, anything you say, you can say again because we can edit it in and out,
All right.
however works best for you. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Very good. So, Oded, it's a pleasure, really, to have this opportunity to have some minutes with you to discuss the topic that's on your mind all the time for many years now, the topic of hope, and certainly something that's on our mind as well. It seems like the world just doesn't stop giving us reasons to seek hope, to seek some way to deal with our current situation. So I want to just begin by asking you, in your own words, to talk about hope. You often distinguish between passive optimism and active hope. And in a landscape today where many people feel paralyzed by global events, how do you define hope? What makes it what makes it a psychologically protective mechanism rather than just something that might be called wishful thinking? What is hope for us today?
These are really important questions. The answers for them are long and varied. But maybe I'll address several things, like three things in your questions, and I'll actually talk about the definitions of hope last. The first thing I would say that whenever we talk about hope, we always talk about hope in the presence of some action. So hope, real hope, is always attached to engagement, to activity. There is no such thing as idle hope. This is Erich Fromm, one of the most important philosophers who talked about hope, said there's no such thing as idle hope. If you say you hope for something but are not active in pursuing that goal, this is not actually hope. It could be optimism, it could be something else, but hope always has a behavioral outcome, and we also see it in our research. We also see the very strong connection. I'm a quantitative researcher, so most of my studies are, statistical modeling. And we always see a very strong predictive power of hope on behavioral outcomes. And so, action, commitment, engagement is a part of hope. Okay. And so this is the first thing we have to say.
Mhm.
The second topic has to do with hope as a coping mechanism.
Yes.
And we know that hope is a strong coping mechanism in times of crisis, personal crisis, social crisis. But we also have to, I think, be a bit, raise some questions about this property of hope. Because sometimes when we use hope in order for us to cope with stress and cope with anxiety, and the current, as you said, the current global situation produces this anxiety, and so we use hope to cope and address this stress. Sometimes it goes at the expense of using this hope to change the political circumstances or the social circumstances. So we could either take hope and direct it inward to cope with the stressful reality, or we could take hope outward to change the stressful reality. And so we need to be aware that we kind of need to balance. We need hope. The coping feature of hope is important. We shouldn't kind of disregard it. But we also need to make sure that we don't use only hope internally, but we use it also to change the circumstances. And the third thing, when you talk about the definition of hope, so the way that I offer to understand hope is as a bi-dimensional mental construct that is actually connected to two dimensions. The first is what we call the expectation dimension, and that is related to the perceived feasibility of a desirable outcome. What are the chances, right? And so many people, when they ask me, they say, so you're a researcher of hope. Is there any hope for democracy, for peace and equality? Then they ask what are you referring to this expectation dimension. But there's actually another dimension, a very important and sometimes even more important dimension than the expectation dimension, is what we call the wish dimension. And that is related to the strength of our desires and aspirations and dreams. This is like the dream dimension. The more we wish for something, the more we aspire and desire something, the more we hope for it, right? We never hope for things that we are indifferent to. And so many times when we ask this question, is there hope for rectifying the Israeli society, reducing anti-Semitism? The question is, what is the strength of this dream and how do we articulate it in a way that will mobilize people? And we actually know also from the statistical research, but also from history, that many times people's aspirations and dreams actually were able to move things forward despite the low odds, right? Despite the low chances, despite the low expectations, people's wishes and desires and aspirations actually make the world progress. And so I would also really stress the wish dimension, not only what's likely, but how much we want and desire something, and how much we know to articulate this desire in a way that is compelling, that is inspiring, and mobilizing other people.
At times I've heard you say or read something you've written where you talk about hope being as essential to humanity as like food and water. Can you comment a little on that? What does that mean exactly, that hope is an essential part of humanity?
So, yeah, so we know that really hope is an existential human need. Okay, people could not live without hope. And if we also talk about hope in Hebrew and the scriptures, we also know that the word hope, or the root of hope, kuf vav yud, kuf vav hey, which is tikva, is also the root of mikveh, right? Mikveh, reservoir. And reservoir is in many ways the physical resource of life, a water reservoir, right? Water is a physical resource of life. And hope is in many ways the spiritual resource of human life, right? We need hope. We take it, we use it as a resource to, cope and live through this reality. And so hope is really essential. We know it from Viktor Frankl, who wrote about hope in the death camps and talked about meaning and hope in the death camp. And from his observations, those who had at least some hope, either for something small like a piece of bread or something big like, the end of the war and the release from the camps, people that had this ingredient had at least some component that enabled them to survive. It doesn't mean that they necessarily survived, but had something essential that helped them. And people who lost hope perished the next day. We also hear it from the people who were held in captivity, right, in Gaza. And by
Gaza
the way,
is
this is a
right.
great opportunity that we need to celebrate the release and the end of the really dreadful war in Gaza that was detrimental to Israelis and Palestinians alike. So that the war was so destructive. And so, when we last met, it was during the war. And now the war is over, the hostages are back. And we need to, thinking about the hostages, by the way, there's a huge lesson here. Because the hope was not only in the hearts of those who were captive and their families, the hope for their release was also very strong among the Israeli public. And so the public mobilization and outcry and campaigns that were massive in Israel, hundreds of thousands rallying each week to support a hostage deal and to end the war. And the campaigns, on bridges and, everywhere, and in the US and in Europe. You saw this campaign, bring them back home. You saw
Yes,
it
right.
everywhere. And this very and the desires, right? The desire of the Israeli public and all of these supporters to, to bring them back and to support the deal, etc., actually made that transpire through a very, uncommon way through the American administration, right? And so we know that the president has heard the Israeli public and saw the polls that says that more than 80% of the Israeli public support a hostage deal. And so the articulation of this desire was so strong and it was so impressive that it made this transpire,
Hmm.
right?
That
And
this is an
so
example of
don't know how things will work out, right? We don't know what exactly is the way that things will actually, our hopes will be manifested. But when people have strong desires and strong will and know how to articulate it in inspiring ways, that then many times things happen.
I mean, I guess that's the story of the Jewish people in general, as the Hatikva of the state of Israel, the hope of 2,000 years, right? It wasn't just like as you point, it wasn't just like, oh, we have a hope, maybe we'll hope for it. The people seem to be working toward it in all kinds of ways to the point, just like you really have no idea how it's actually going to come about ultimately. But the efforts of Zionism to work for the purpose of bringing about the return to the Jewish homeland is a great example of exactly this.
I will say actually two things. Zionism is a great example of how hope works because if the first Zionists would think about the chances, the likelihood of establishing a homeland for the Jewish people, it was the Ottoman Empire, it was the Turkish people who ruled in the late 19th century. The odds are zero, right? But because they didn't stress this point, they didn't think only about the chances, but they thought about the need and the will and the desires for a Jewish homeland, they were active about it. And then the expectations kind of came after that, right? And kind of the feasibility was made. I will say another thing that currently Israel is again in a state of, trying to there is a huge tension in Israel. The majority of Israel want the original Zionist values that are, for example, manifested in the Declaration of Independence of Israel. That Israel will return to them because we see that the government is departing from them in a very, very drastic way. And so there's a huge tension between the public of Israel, that most of the people want to go back to the original, values of Zionism as articulated by the founders of this state, while the leadership is going in a very, very different direction. And so the hopes, that you were talking about the anthem, and the words "Lihiyot am chofshi be'artzenu," to be a free people in our land, actually are now double important, and people feel their relevance again when they are, in the rallies for democracy in the rallies for the hostages, these words have become relevant again because people here, the public feels that it is, being kind of pressed by the Israeli leadership. And so, yeah, there's a lot to be done. That's we are still in the works, and
For
we are
sure.
still,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I want to talk about one very specific tragic event that so many of us are dealing with right now, which did not happen in Israel, but happened in Australia. In the wake of the horrific events um, at the Bondi Beach massacre, where there's a certain, in the wake of these things, there's a certain sense of a shattering of a sense of public safety. If you were asked, to be speaking to a group of leaders of the Australian Jewish community, wondering like where should they go from here? How can a community like that begin to reconstruct a sense of hope? What would be like the first steps toward a hope-based rehabilitation for those who are directly impacted by such violence?
Yeah, so I think we could again kind of divide the answer to two levels. First of all, this is a tragic event, and there are others around the world, and we see a rise in anti-Semitism. We see a rise in the violent manifestation of anti-Semitism in many places around the world, right? And Jews and Israelis are attacked around the world. And this is, like any tragedy, the communities need to, reestablish their sense of dignity and safety as they rebuild themselves from the tragedy. And for example, I know about the Israeli community. I'm thinking about the Israelis after the 7th of October, of course, which was even a grander scale. I will say that more and more people understand that of course, anti-Semitism as a phenomena is very old, but the new kind of the new type or the new kind of emergence is very much connected to the way that the Israeli leadership and the things that it says and the policies it pursues. Because when you pursue such an excessive, when you hear leaders speak, or the current leadership, the current government in Israel speak about Muslims or Arabs or Palestinians in such a way, a derogatory way, and hoping to see, people dead. This is like so many Israelis are ashamed of what these leaders say, and that is like fuel. If anti-Semitism is something that is kind of there, it's kind of a fuel that helps that emerge and inflames these things. And so the leadership does not reflect how most of the Israelis think, and are actually Israelis are many times ashamed and embarrassed by the policies, and the rhetoric of the leadership. And so one of the things, this is one of the things that so many people here are struggling to replace the Israeli leadership and try, any attempt even for peace and conciliation in the region is something that will turn down these flames, And we know from the past that Jews and Muslims can live together when there are moderates, when the moderates are in charge. Right now, both in the Gaza Strip and in the Israeli society, the extremists are in charge, and extremists only inflame, hatred and animosity. And so this is kind of one of the ways to do it is, to to change the current leadership and find moderate leaders who will, turn down the flames and will try to make paths for peace and conciliation, or at least, kind of decreasing the flames, decreasing animosity, and this really dreadful rhetoric that we hear from extremists.
So, and how that apply, I was thinking about specifically like Australian Jewry, like what should they be doing, in the face of this, they're just an example of a Jewish community in the diaspora that's been really painfully attacked right now. And they've been living, kind of in the shadow of growing anti-Semitism over there. Are you just saying it's all about Israel, or is there something, that diaspora Jews should be doing as well?
That's a huge question. And again, as a researcher, I try to look at, when we do like statistical modelings, we think about an outcome, let's say
Yes.
in this case, anti-Semitism, and we try to think about all the elements that might influence or predict this outcome, right? And so the predictive power of each element is an empirical question. How is this element, how much does it actually affect the outcome? And we don't, we could do an empirical examination and kind of see, okay, but you cannot, let's say, you cannot ignore the fact that one, the the way that the Israeli leadership is talking and the policies it pursues and the rhetoric it uses, and the fact that anti-Semitism is rising, you could make quite a clear connection. Now, it doesn't say that if we will deal with that, it will disappear completely. And there are many things, including, including things that, of course, the local authorities, Australians or Europeans or Americans need to do, of course, right? But we know at least that this is one thing that we could do. And the second thing I will say, another thing, which is true for many, many goals that we want to pursue, and it doesn't matter in this case if it's for strengthening democracy around the world or peace or reducing anti-Semitism, whatever that goal is. And we were talking about a wish dimension. One of the things that we
Yeah.
could do is articulate in an inspiring and engaging way how beautiful life would be when we achieve our goal. So right now, when we're talking about anti-Semitism, most of the people want to raise awareness of the problem. And that's an important
Mhm.
thing, and say, okay, here is an anti-Semitic attack, and here is an anti-Semitic rhetoric or, opinion in the news, etc. And we need to acknowledge that and decrease that. But we also need to talk about how beautiful life will be when this problem is addressed and when
Mm.
anti-Semitism is mitigated and reduced, and how communal life will be better and how and beneficial for everyone, right? So we know that when anti-Semitism and also Islamophobia or other forms of racial hatred, where they're reduced, the public will benefit. Everyone will benefit from this, right? And so we need to also talk about that and envision that, articulate that, provide imagery of how great and life will be when these problems are reduced. And this is another
Wow.
thing that we could do. And it's hard, right? It's hard to imagine and hard to articulate. But if there's something we need to invest in, is to know how to talk about the future that we seek, how to talk about it in inspiring ways. And all
That
the
is
great
beautiful.
leaders, by the
Oh.
way, all the great leaders, when they had a goal, right? When Martin Luther King had a goal to reduce racial, discrimination in the US, he articulated how it's going to look like and how
Mm.
great and beautiful life will be when this
It's
problem.
and so did right. And Herzl wrote the Jewish state when who could imagine? And
Exactly.
Al Neuland, like he just wrote about what it's going to look like. It's so beautiful, Oded. It's so encouraging, inspiring. It's great, a great thought. And if you have just a couple more minutes, one last hopeful lighter question to just finish with, um, because I think that the message you have, like we talk about it a lot of times, like on the plane of national hope, um, communal hope, keep hope for our people. But I wondered if we could just bring it down just for a few moments to the level of a family. Like what you know about hope, how might parents and elders instill hope as a core family value? Like specifically, what are the elements of passing down a hopeful worldview to the next generation, to our children, our grandchildren, without appearing to like be shielding them from the truths of the world, without looking like we're just naive, like what's the fine line between hope and realism when it comes to passing these values on to our children, our families? What might you have to offer us in that regard?
Wow, that's a huge question. And first, I need to, just to say that what I specialize is really hope in social and political context, right? So
Okay.
as a social
Mhm.
phenomena or a collective phenomena.
Understood.
So I'm not that an expert about like personal or interpersonal hope, but I will say that, you know, true hope is not about saying everything will be fine, right? Or things will be better, or count on me, it's going to be okay. No, that's not hope. Okay, hope is something that is it's deeper. It's more like a vector or a compass than an end goal. So when you say everything's going to be fine, it's kind of you saying the end goal will be okay. But hope is like a vector, a direction. Okay, this is where we want to go. This is how we're going to do it. Yeah, the situation now is bad, and no one knows if it's going to be improved, but this is at least where we want to go.
Mm.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is hope is not naive. Real hope does not paint reality in rosy colors. It is very realistic in a sense that it knows to look the harsh reality in the eye, you know, and through this harsh reality. So we acknowledge it. We don't dismiss it or diminish it. We know this is the case. There is war, there is anti-Semitism, there is, whatever the problem is. We know this is it. But through this, we kind of provide the goal, know how to talk about it and articulate it in inspiring ways, and try to pull people with us to that direction. The third thing I want to say is that hope in itself is not actually a value because it depends what you hope for, right? So people could hope for awful things.
Mm.
We know from
Mm.
history that people hope for awful things, right? No, we don't want people to hope for awful things. We want hope to be used to provide, increased tolerance between groups, increased tolerance between people, increase equality, increase brotherhood between people, solidarity, compassion, right? We need hope in that direction because some
Mm.
people use hope and their hopes are for different things, right? And so I
Mm.
wouldn't necessarily say that we need to nourish her hope for something, for as a general thing, but hope for, you know, things that I think I value, right? And I think we all
Yeah,
share.
sure. Sure. Just in reflecting, I think that's kind of like what we do try to do in our bet when we're our best persons is we try to talk about a future that will be brighter, that will be better. And I think maybe, and I'll just finish with this thought, is that the more we can get the people who don't see eye to eye with us, who don't agree with us, that is the people who are either our enemies or all those who just contend that we're in tension with, to kind of agree to some kind of mutual vision for something in the future, despite the fact that we don't agree on everything, then we all have something to hope for, like the picture that you're painting of what it could be like if we were working together, what it could be like if we were, even though we're not going to agree on everything, but what it would be like if we at least agreed on this, that we worked on this together, that we had a hope for it. It seems to me like to whatever extent we can breed that hope in others as well, and not only within our own selves, that's the way we'll get to this. Like my being hopeful is going to get me only to here. but there's about more than hopeful. Me having hope and taking action toward that hope is going to get me here. But if there's a world out here that's not in any way convinced that that goal is to their advantage, then I feel like there's like a ceiling. I can only get this far. If I can somehow, I feel like the Abraham Accords theoretically is meant to do something like that. Like say, hey, it's worth your while too to buy into this future. It's going to be good for you too, and then we can get there. I think it's a hopeful thinking, but a wishful thought that we should get to the point where we're able to not only articulate our own vision, but bring it to others as well to see it as in their best interests too. So that's where we need to go. But I want to thank you, Oded. It's always great, inspiring opportunity to speak with you anytime I have that opportunity. And we look forward to sharing your insights and your thoughts with our world at large. Are you working on anything in particular now? Particular book or particular specific research that you're very involved in right now?
About a million projects.
I
So
expected.
books and work with students, and I just opened and expanded the research center at the Hebrew University, the International Hub for Hope Research, and we have amazing students from various backgrounds, super talented, the smartest students from, psychology, political science, sociology, cognitive science, Jewish thought. So really, really interesting people. And yeah, we're working on a bunch of projects. And this is all, we feel obliged to Tikkun Olam. And this is what we want to do, repair the world. There's a lot of repairing to do.
Awesome. That isn't there always. Okay. I wish you in the last few minutes of Hanukkah for you. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy
So we
Hanukkah. Chag
still
Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Okay, all the best. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.